Hey everyone, welcome to Rock Bottom Syndicate. I'm your host, Joyce Strong. Rock Bottom Syndicate is about people who have a story to tell to inspire others to keep working toward their potential no matter what happens. Rock Bottom is an opportunity to learn and pivot and adapt to whatever life throws your way. Rock bottom's a time where you can choose to take responsibility for everything in your life, because when you take responsibility, you own the control, you own the power to make changes and to grow. You're secret to the prison of your emotions, so ask for help, tell your story. In this episode, actually parts 1 and 2 episodes, I'm speaking with Lynn and Randy Abramovic, who are the parents of Heather Gross. I've interviewed Heather in a 2-part series on Rock Bottom Syndicate about her story, which was at 22, she suffered a devastating brain bleed that caused her partial paralysis and an unknown future. Heather lost a lot. She lost function in her left hand. She lost her ability to compete in her equestrian um, pursuits, and so she was competitive in equestrian field and was unable to continue on with that after her stroke and her surgeries and ongoing surgeries. So lots of challenges going on, and in these 2 episodes today, I'm talking with Lynn and Randy about the other side of being caregivers in their daughter's life and what that was like, and some suggestions from them on what held them together and what to do if you find yourself in this kind of a situation. A lot of it had to do with their faith in God. They're sticking together as a team. They're asking and accepting help, and really looking for the positive and supporting each other and how they could team up to be able to take care of themselves, take care of their daughter, and adapt to their new situation, which was like being on another planet for them for a while. They're doing great. They're publishing a book called Headstrong. That's coming out sometime this year with Heather. So you'll hear more about that. We'll put some information in the show notes as well. So I hope you're going to enjoy this part 1 and part 2 of Rock Bottom Syndicate with Lynn and Randy Abramovic, and their experience as caregivers and their rock bottom after seeing their daughter suffer a catastrophic brain bleed, only to come out better than ever, looking forward to new challenges, a new book that's going to help all of us. So would love to hear from you. Reach out to Lynn and Randy, reach out to Heather, reach out to me. We'd love to talk. And I hope you enjoy this show. Welcome to Rock Bottom Syndicate.
Thank you for having us.
You're very welcome. And I was introduced to you through your beautiful daughter, Heather Gross, who is writing a book about her story, which had to do with recovery after a devastating illness.
Yes.
And she told me that, coincidentally, she told me that you were her primary caregivers. And I had just recently interviewed somebody on Rock Bottom Syndicate who had been in your shoes, so to speak, had been a caregiver and had some surprising things happen in her life and learned a lot from it. So that's when Heather suggested that I speak with you about your experience being primary caregivers for a child who had a devastating illness.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it was definitely a very surreal time, because as Heather spoke, she was only 22 and in college, and as a mom, I was prepared for boys, alcohol, drugs, but not a brain hemorrhage. So, and then when, as she explained, it continued to bleed, we were fearful we were going to lose her, because it did become very life-threatening.
Do you have other children as well, or just Heather?
We have an older daughter.
Okay.
And but we're blessed that they're both local, so we get to see them very often.
So in Heather's situation, she's your second daughter.
Yes.
So she was 22 years old and had something happen that perhaps she's had all her life. You want to
Right.
explain a little bit about what happened?
Well, she was home on Christmas break, and kind of to put it in a nutshell, had been feeling funny, and I kind of just thought it was due to, she had just finished finals, thought it was stress, and when we took her to the hospital, finally, because she had these tingling sensations on her left side, and they did a CAT scan, and then I remember the nurse never left the room, and that was odd because
Mm-hmm.
usually, they're in and out, and I thought, oh, something's not good.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when they came in and said that she had had a hemorrhage, and they were deciding whether to transport her by ambulance or by life flight to Presbyterian Hospital downtown, and that obviously I knew something was very serious.
Mm-hmm.
Went on to have four more hemorrhages over the next 11 months, which ultimately ended with brain surgery. And that was a, very scary moment for us, because the neurosurgeon came in and said that they hadn't wanted to remove it before because they were afraid of damage. They were, going into the brain,
Right.
damage. But he said, we have to get this out or it's going to kill her.
Mm-hmm.
And so
she was born with it. It's called a cavernous malformation,
Mm-hmm.
and it was on her thalamus in the center of her brain, and couldn't have been in a worse spot, but that's where it was.
yeah, they called the thalamus the Park Place of your brain. So it's like a switching kind of board that all the signals filter through there.
Mm-hmm.
So she only has one, and we felt blessed because there is another gene with this that you can have multiples of them.
Yeah.
And that we through Angioma Alliance, we have gotten to know people who do have multiples. So I guess our blessing was there was only one,
Mm-hmm.
but it was in probably the worst possible place.
Wow. And she told me a little bit about her story, and I encourage our viewers to look at Heather's episode. She's got 2 episodes, in fact, parts 1 and 2 on Rock Bottom Syndicate, telling the details of her story. So for today, I was really interested because I was primed with having interviewed somebody else, with what happens with the caregivers, and we don't often think of that, what you're going through, or when we're in that role, what we're going through. And what I learned from this other person was it took her by surprise. She didn't see it coming. It was like a train hit her. Can you tell me about like the sequence of how things happened with you and what happened?
Well, obviously, the initial reaction after the first bleed was, I knew nothing about this. And I had worked in the rehabilitation field before, so I reached out to a physician I worked with there. And then through Google, thank heavens for Google, I found Angioma Alliance, because this is a relatively rare condition. And so I was thankful that Connie Lee, who was the founder of it, started this alliance, because I found out more information and at least got some direction. And it really, it changed our lives also, through worrying about Heather, frequent ER visits, and then ultimately when she had the final and major bleed, at that point, I never left the hospital until she went to a rehab facility. So, I spent about 4 weeks inside Presbyterian, just, by her bedside. And Randy, we had our own business. He was trying to keep our business going. And then he would come to the hospital in the evening, and then we were blessed with neighbors that we called it his drive-through dinner. He would, pull into their driveway, and our friend Linda would bring a meal out to him.
Oh, wow.
And kind of, I guess, from a caregiver standpoint, my MO is kind of, during the crisis, I'm strong and I'm there.
Mm-hmm.
And then probably about a year after Heather came home, because we did a lot of rehab after home also, because she came home in a wheelchair and was totally dependent. So it was kind of taking me back to when she was a child or a baby. And then about a year after, she, at this point, she was more independent. But I was coming home from work one day, and all of a sudden I started having these episodes where I would see something, and it was almost like a sinking feeling. And I talked with my eldest daughter, who's thankfully a clinical psychologist, and she said, "Mom, I think you're suffering from PTSD." And I thought, okay. So I did go to see my doctor. They initially were concerned maybe it was some type of a more of an electrical episode. So I was tested for that. But then I did go to counseling and did some talk therapy. And that helped so much. And
if I could just back up a little, I don't know if I really grasped what your symptoms were. Like, for other people who might be going through this, what it might feel like at the beginning, what you might.
It was almost as if I would drive by somewhere we were. Like, I remember distinctly, prior to knowing about what the first bleed was, we were at a place, Heather was home, and she mentioned something about her tongue felt funny. And we were by this certain building. So every time I went by that building, that I would relive that moment, because I remember her saying that to me, and I said to her, I was discounting everything, because I wasn't thinking a 22-year-old healthy young woman would have had a stroke. And I remember saying that time, "Oh, you probably just drank some coffee this morning and burned your tongue." So it was places like that, things like that. So
And what would happen to you? Did you get like palpitations? Did you have an anxiety attack?
I think it was an anxiety attack. It was almost this feeling of sinking. And it was short-lived, but it continued to happen, and it continued by, again, driving by a different place when she said that, or just continuing to see, Heather was left with some physical deficits following this, and just seeing her struggle and thinking, why did this happen to her?
Yeah.
And
trying to process it. What about you, Randy? Did you experience any of those kinds of?
No, I didn't have that, but what I had as a dad was, how am I going to fix this? I was charged with, from the initial diagnosis, when they said this is what it was, we started doing research all over the country and reaching out to other physicians, specialists, to try to get Heather help. I was actually at the time involved with an organization called Entrepreneurial Organization, EO, which is global. And they put us in touch with a group in Chicago. So we started taking her everywhere and sending her scans everywhere to get other opinions, because Dad was going to get this fixed. This was something that I could do.
Yeah.
As you can see, it still hits home in my heart, because it was very difficult. But as far as I was concerned we were going to get this fixed and everything was going to be good.
Mhm.
And Heather was, she's our youngest, so she was a senior in college. You know, her tuition was all paid up, and you know, we're all like, they're going to be empty nesters, and it's all going to be. And then this certainly was not in the cards. And Heather was a very accomplished equestrian, and we had horses from the time she was 2.5 until after this happened. And we had just been in Aruba in November, riding on the beach, the three of us, and just having a ball because none of this had happened. And to think a month from now, our lives just got turned upside down. And then she was in the hospital for a month at Presby, and then in rehab for another month. So for 2 months, you know, this was tough going. And but then when we got her home, I thought, well, my life's going to change again, because when she came home in a wheelchair and totally dependent, but she's so bound and determined, she was like going to beat this.
Mhm.
And son of a gun, if she hasn't, you know, she does have, as Lynn mentioned, has some deficits, but she surprised everyone. She got an award at the one rehab center for being the best patient that they'd ever seen, and they did a luncheon for her. And that's just her. That's just Heather. You know, she is one strong cookie.
Well, ever since even when she was a toddler, she would, you know, I would try like to grab her hand at certain times, you know, as a mom. No, I do it. And that's what she continued to do even through this. And I think that's what gave us strength also.
Mhm.
And I can't speak highly enough of Angioma Alliance, because I remember I was in the hospital and a woman from Texas called me. Her son had one of these and just wanted to be supportive, and you know, as a mom to a mom, of you know how hard this is to watch your child go through this. And so I would strongly encourage anyone, and it doesn't have to be a medical condition, but whether it be psychological or an addiction, or there's so much help out there.
Mhm.
And to not be afraid to ask, you know, because you know, my daughter being a therapist, you know, a lot of people look at mental issues that there's something wrong with you.
Mhm.
And it's just like it's like high blood pressure or diabetes, or, you know, there's treatment options out there. That I know that between that and also our faith in God, that was a huge part that helped us through this.
Mhm. Wow. I can see there's still a lot of raw emotion coming out as you talk about it. How long ago did the first bleed happen, the first diagnosis happen from now?
7 years.
It was
How long?
7 years.
7 years ago. And it's almost in your faces like it was yesterday.
Yeah.
It's still.
It was when that doctor walked in at the ER at the
St. Margaret.
ICU. No, at Presby, and
Oh.
Dr. Freelander, and said that we have to get this out or we're going to lose her. That's, for us, was just incredible. You know,
And, you know, and it was a 9-hour craniotomy.
Mhm.
And it was amazing because Heather, again, she is a little crazy, but the two things she was worried about as they're wheeling her into the operating room were, one, what was she going to do about her finals at
Yeah.
college? And I'm like, who cares? And two, the neurosurgeon said she would probably wake up with a breathing tube, and so not to be frightened by that.
Yeah.
And she just, when we prayed together before the surgery, she just asked that the breathing tube be gone.
Yeah.
So we sat there, surgery, you know, I remember the kind of the sign came up in the family waiting room that said surgery began. And 9 hours later, you know, we were pretty much the only folks left in there. Everybody else had, you know, come and gone. And the phone rang at the desk, and it was Dr. Friedlander. And he asked to speak with us. So I thought that was a good sign, because it wasn't like they made you go in this little side room, you know, that kind of thing. And he said the surgery was done, it went well, and he was able to remove the breathing tube.
Oh,
And when I heard that, I was just, oh, thank you, God.
yeah.
So that was a huge blessing. And then when she was back in ICU for a few days following the surgery, and her sister was getting, this was in December, and her sister was getting married in May. And Lauren was kind of standing by Heather's bed and was shedding tears and crying, because she had all these tubes and drains, and she had a huge, you know, incision on the side of her head. And Heather was groggy but waking up, and she looked at Lauren crying, and she said, "What are you crying for? I'll be dancing at your wedding." Well, at that point, I went, because we didn't know cognitively what would, you know, if something would have happened. I just went, "Oh, Heather's still there." So that was a huge, huge blessing.
When she was being operated on, because her request about the grades, which she finally graduated summa cum laude, and she had great grades her last semester of her senior year. And so in the waiting room, I had my laptop. I reached out to every one of her professors and told them what was going on, and pleaded with them to allow her to accept whatever grade level she was at that point in the term. And because I didn't think she'd be back for, I knew she wouldn't be back for finals, but I didn't know when she'd ever be back. And lo and behold, all except one accepted that. And the one, we went back and forth and back and forth. And then on Christmas Day, he sent me a note saying that he was going to give her a C, and he finally accepted.
He dropped her
a grade, and that he accepted her this situation finally. But that was okay, because she didn't have to go back and do that stuff, and I was happy that I could do something. And then another thing that happened in the ICU and after the operation is that Lynn and I never, for 9 days, we didn't leave there. And so Lynn was out of the room. I was there praying beside Heather. And in all my life, I've never had like this vision. And the vision from God was that Heather was dancing at her sister's wedding, and then she was going to get married again. And then that God said, "Tell Heather to have a wonderful life." So what I did was, there was a napkin on the tray in front of her. So I grabbed the napkin, took a pen, and wrote down, "Dear Heather, have a wonderful life, God." And so then we had that framed, and it's still in her home today, that as a reminder that, and she's having a wonderful life. And we're just so thankful that she's here, because she's going to help so many people in her life. It's there's a real purpose.
And I'm thankful for us as a couple also, because I worked, as I mentioned, in physical rehab before, and I worked with spinal cord injured patients. And so often you either saw families drawing together, or something catastrophic like this ripping families apart. And as I mentioned, we had our own business, so of which I was working in. So when I was pulled out for how many months, you know, the pressure of all that fell onto Randy. But we both realized he was doing what he needed to do. And just by reaching out to the professors, and he did that while Heather was in surgery, that is what he needed to do there to help her. And then I did what I needed to do. And thankfully, we both recognized that and kind of worked together through it.
We just celebrated 40 years of marriage. It's hard to believe that she's putting up with me all these years.
Well, you
She's going for sainthood. So
you seem like an incredibly strong couple and great parents, for sure.